Hello and welcome to our Retire Early lifestyle, where we have another enlightening story to share with you today. So let's dive right in. When you read the mass media headlines, you would think everyone is leaving America and moving to a foreign country. But it's not true. Americans aren't leaving in droves. The truth is, some Americans are leaving and they do follow the crowds, but when you discover the real number of Americans that live abroad and compare that figure to the population of America, it's a minuscule amount that live abroad. We have to put everything into proper perspective because otherwise it's not worth a hill of beans. Here's how we know Americans do not live abroad in droves. First, we have to investigate who is reporting on this narrative. This is one of the first things you do when you need to get to the bottom of something. Is it both alternative and mass media? If not, why not? I can't find one article by the alternative media that states Americans are leaving in droves. Mass media, retire and travel abroad media, and the vlogger gang are the only ones saying this outrageous statement about Americans leaving America in droves. It makes you wonder, why? Take a look or do the research yourself. It doesn't take very long to put the phrase in the search engine on YouTube or in Google. Just do it and then read. I'm on page 3 of the search engine and still not one alternative media outlet reporting that Americans are leaving the USA and in droves. So this leaves us to believe it's the shills, the international real estate pumpers, and the travel, retire abroad media and vlogger gang that want you to believe that they somehow have the solution to all the problems and troubled hearts in the world. And if you want to make your money go further, or you want to feel better about your life, just move over here to these countries and watch all your troubles fly away, they'll say. So again, every single report is coming from the mass media and people in the travel industry. Don't you want balanced reporting? And that brings me to the next reason why Americans are not moving abroad in droves, even though that's what they want you to think. We know this because we did the research. We got the results showing that Americans aren't living abroad in droves. To find out how many Americans actually live abroad, we had to figure out who would be the best organization to know these statistics. The first thought that came to our mind was the State Department, but upon further investigation, it is actually not the State Department because their statistics are really varied and are not accurate, and they tell you this themselves. They've reported that they don't keep track of how many Americans live abroad, but estimate it to be about 9 million. But that figure also includes tourists abroad as well. So now we know they're also counting tourists that are abroad as well, and so that 9 million is not an accurate figure of how many are living abroad. The State Department doesn't really do the deep dive research and so can't give a fair analysis. And here's what they said, that in 2016 they thought that about 9 million Americans lived abroad, but they don't disclose the basis for this estimate. So anyway, we're not done doing our deep dive research. More digging brought us to the Association of American Resident Overseas, and it must have been my blessed day because they just updated it in October 2024, how many Americans live abroad. And they estimate that it's about 5.5 million Americans that live abroad. The AARO reported that of October of 2024 that 5.5 million Americans are living abroad right now. Upon further investigation, we find out that this organization actually does the due diligence reporting, so the figure is fairly accurate. If you want to see how they came to the conclusion, you can check out their analysis by clicking the link to their website below this video. I'm going to give you the golden nugget version in a nutshell in this video, and here it is in several charts and screenshots for your viewing eyes. AARO has been consulting for many years with Mr. Heiter David Pinto, an engineer living near Washington, D.C. Mr. Pinto has researched a variety of international topics such as human migration, passport statistics, and comparison of nationality and tax laws among countries. He has also been involved in advocacy for international individuals, in particular Americans abroad. And he made a deep analysis and has recently estimated that a total of 5,538,342 U.S. citizens live overseas, and he has shared the research with us. Knowing this number of how many Americans actually are living abroad shows us that the multitude of headlines of Americans moving overseas in droves are a fabricated overstatement and an outright lie. Copy and paste comes to mind. All the Americans that live abroad now, if you gathered them all up into a basket, would fit nicely in the state of South Carolina or Minnesota when we use the 5 million Americans as an estimate, which it is just an estimate, but a very close one. Maybe it's 4.5 million, or maybe it's 5.5 million Americans that live abroad. Take a look at this chart just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. 5.5 million U.S. citizens abroad would be the 23rd most populous state in the United States between Minnesota and South Carolina. So that means all the Americans that live abroad right now would equal the population of the state of South Carolina. Can we stop laughing now? Does that qualify as droves? Well, maybe on some level it does, but it's a very small percentage drove, like 1.5%. So my question for you today is, does that seem like Americans are leaving America in droves? You would think that at least a quarter of the 300 million Americans would be living abroad by the way the travel and retire abroad media talks. But in reality, it is just a small portion of Americans that are actually living abroad. Interestingly, we find that the American Association for Resident Overseas also reports about some of the difficulties and challenges that expats face when they move abroad. Something that most organizations, forums, and promoters for living abroad omit from their websites. So to us, this gives them even more credibility to the real number of Americans that live abroad right now. While listening to vloggers and the Rams, you'd think everyone living abroad was on a perpetual vacation with maids at their beck and call and living in an eternal spring paradise. But the AARO is sharing expat truths on their website, and here are some of them. They say that living overseas is difficult for Americans. No matter how many we are, Americans who have moved overseas face legal and regulatory impediments that make life abroad difficult, such as FATCA and FBAR reporting is tedious, redundant, and expensive, and could lead to onerous penalties. U.S.-based financial institutions and banks refuse to deal with Americans living overseas, often terminating accounts with little notice. We've made videos about that before. Overseas Americans are caught between two conflicting tax systems, the mandatory U.S. citizenship-based tax system and the resident-based tax system in the country where they live. We've made videos about that before.
So what does that mean? Well, it means that you need to do a little bit of critical thinking here, guys, okay? When you buy foreign property, which is one of the assets, there's 2 or 3 assets that are supposedly IRS free. When you buy that real estate abroad, where's the money coming from? Okay, yeah, right, it's coming from your account, and yeah, your transfer is recorded. But when you sell the property, what happens then? I'm sure you've thought of these things. When you sell the property, where's the money going? Okay, well, your accounts as a U.S. citizen are all recorded and reported. So when you buy the property and when you sell the property, there's no IRS freedom.
And saving for retirement can be difficult, if not impossible, due to the conflicting requirements. Tax-free investments in the country of residence being taxed by the United States, and onerous reporting to the United States. More issues and problems which confront overseas Americans can be found in the reports from the AARO Advocacy Survey you can find on their website. The link is below this video. We just thought we'd touch on that before we moved on to give you our second opinion of how many Americans live abroad, because we always do our due diligence, especially when we investigate something that is important, like droves of Americans leaving America. And so we found another organization called American Citizens Abroad, and here's what they reported for 2022 on how many Americans live abroad, and they even went so far as to tell us how many of them are retired, and apparently there is an influx of retirees living abroad, according to this 2022 report. In 2022, the group American Citizens Abroad estimated that around 5 million Americans were living abroad. Around 23% of those are retired people, highlighting an influx of later life expats. The American Citizens Abroad states that about 5.2 million U.S. citizens were living abroad in 2022, and of that 5.2 million, 1.2 million were military. And so the non-military Americans that live abroad are actually about 4 million. So what does that number sound like to you? Does 4 or 5 million seem like a lot to you? Does that sound like droves of Americans are fleeing the USA and can't wait to get out? I mean, that's coming from over 330 million people, 4 or 5 million. So it looks like the number is getting smaller. Finally, let's ask ourselves, why on earth would these outfits want you to believe that Americans are leaving America in droves? What do they get out of pushing Americans to move abroad? Seriously, are they paid? Well, some of them are, while some are real estate pumpers and investors. Others work for the Retire Abroad media. It's their job to tell Americans how wonderful it is living abroad, while others work in the tourism or expatism industries. And still others are just trying to keep people happy and clicking on their titles for the ad revenue they receive on their YouTube channels. And lastly, you may be wondering, well, if only 4 to 5 million Americans live abroad at one time, how come is there so much price gouging and skyrocketing prices? Well, we've talked about this before a lot on this channel. All it takes is one expat to accept an overpriced rental quote, and for that quote to set a precedent in that area.
Because the first step is finding out what is the local rate, and just staying out of the tourism won't tell you what the local rate is. You won't ever know. Meaning just showing up where everybody's going now, branching out and all that won't work for very long. You'll get lucky. You know, you'll be the first one there maybe, and all it takes is one guy to change everything.
That's all it takes. And when the Rams name a place like Portugal or Malaysia the best place to retire or live in the world for that year, and thousands of expats visit, travel, and move there over a 2 or 3 year period, yeah, it's going to explode in price, because that's all it takes. Foreign Americans are usually the targets because, after all, aren't you rich? But now we know the truth. There's only around 4 to 5 million Americans in total that even live abroad. And to end this video, we'll show some charts of the most popular countries where expats live. Here they are: Mexico, Canada, the UK, Israel, Germany, Australia, South Korea, France, Japan, and Spain. We hope you found this video informative and enlightening. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Bye-bye.